You ever get that feeling you know exactly what someone is thinking? Well, what if I told you that back in 1907, a guy named William Walker Atkinson published a how-to guide that promised to teach anyone to do just that? And we're not talking about a magic trick, but a practical scientific skill. Today, we are cracking open this incredible manual to see how, over a century ago, they thought you could learn the art of practical mind reading.
Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like something out of a comic book, right? But check out this quote. This isn't from some fringe mystic. It's from Sir William Crookes, a top-tier physicist and the president of the Royal Society, which is basically one of the most respected scientific groups on the planet. He and others like him genuinely believed that telepathy was a real force of nature just waiting for us to figure it out.
So, here's the game plan for our journey into this amazing guide. We'll start by looking at mind reading as a kind of forgotten science. Then, we'll unpack the wild core theory of mental wireless telegraphy. After we see the so-called proofs they offered, we'll get right into the nuts and bolts, the how-to, from simple party tricks to the grand finale, reading minds without any physical contact at all. Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1907. The world was buzzing, absolutely electric with brand new technologies like wireless telegraphy. So you can kind of see why in that atmosphere, the idea of the human brain sending out its own invisible signals didn't sound so crazy. To a lot of people, it felt like the next logical step, the next big scientific frontier. And this wasn't just some fringe interest either. Atkinson's book landed right in the middle of a moment where intellectual heavyweights were taking this stuff very seriously. We're talking about people like William James, basically the father of American psychology, teaching at Harvard, and the famous astronomer Camille Flammarion. These guys weren't laughing this off. They were actively studying it as a totally legitimate field of research. So how did they think this all actually worked? Well, the explanation in the book is, for its time, pretty brilliant. It piggybacks on the most mind-blowing technology of the day, Marconi's wireless telegraph. The central idea was something they called thought transference. The theory goes like this. Your thoughts aren't just little sparks inside your skull. No, they are actual physical vibrations. Think of them as waves that travel through something called the ether, which was this invisible medium scientists back then thought filled all of space. And if your brain was tuned in or in harmony with the sender's brain, you could literally pick up their thought waves. And look at how direct this comparison was. It's a perfect one-to-one analogy. The transmitter brain creates thought waves, just like a telegraph station creates electric waves. The receiver brain then picks them up. It was this powerful metaphor that took a seemingly magical psychic idea and made it sound totally logical, mechanical, and most importantly, modern. Of course, a great theory is one thing, but you gotta have proof, right? So before getting to the instructions, the book lays out what it considers to be rock-solid scientific evidence. A lot of it came directly from the files of the Society for Psychical Research in England, which was a group of serious scientists looking into exactly these kinds of claims. All right, let's just start with this number. Just let it sink in for a second. 140 million to 1. According to the book, those were the actual calculated odds against one of the most famous psychic demonstrations of the time being just a lucky guess. And this wasn't some number they pulled out of a hat. It was the result of a mathematical analysis of controlled experiments. That unbelievable number came from something called the Creary experiments. Investigators were studying these kids who seemed to have this spooky ability to read minds. And get this, over 382 trials, they got it right 202 times. Now, pure probability says they should have only gotten about 7 correct. But the real showstopper? One of the kids correctly named the suit of 14 playing cards in a row. The odds of that happening by chance are just astronomical. Okay, so with proof like that laid out for the reader, the book finally gets to the good stuff. The how-to guide. And it starts with the most basic form, which it calls contact mind reading, where you use a physical connection to help get those thought waves flowing. The whole technique depends on 2 very different roles. You've got the transmitter, who is the active one, focusing all their mental energy, exerting a really powerful will. And then you have the receiver, that's the mind reader, who has to be the total opposite, completely passive, quiet, and just ready to be led by the transmitter's mental signals. The actual method is broken down into 4 clear steps. First, you establish rapport by breathing together, perfectly in sync, to kind of tune your minds to the same frequency. Second, the transmitter stares at a hidden object and concentrates intensely, thinking only of its direction.
Third, the receiver, who is blindfolded, makes physical contact by placing the transmitter's hand right on their forehead. And finally, the receiver just lets go, passively following that mental pull that guides them to the object. And Atkinson describes this feeling in a really vivid way. He says the receiver feels drawn or impelled irresistibly, almost like they're being pulled by a magnet. The book is also super insistent that this is not muscle reading. You know, the old trick of feeling for tiny subconscious movements. No, they claimed this was a genuine transfer of nerve energy carrying pure thought. So once you master the basics, you could level up to some really elaborate demonstrations. Because this wasn't just meant to be some quiet lab experiment. It was designed to be thrilling entertainment, perfect for a party or even a public stage show. And just look at some of these feats. They're incredibly dramatic. You might have to find a tiny pin that someone hid and then put it back into the exact pinhole it came from. Or you could stage this whole melodrama called The Murder and the Detective, where you have to find the victim, locate the murder weapon, and then point out the killer in the audience. And it was all supposedly done using that same principle of following a mental pull. But all of that was just the opening act. The real endgame, the book's final and most mind-blowing claim, was to achieve what it called the higher phenomena, to read minds with no physical connection whatsoever. This is what the book calls true telepathic mind reading. Now the thought waves are supposedly flying purely through the ether. No hands, no contact, no wires needed. This is the full wireless telegraphy of the mind. The book even says this can happen across huge distances, that space is no barrier for a properly tuned brain. So the big question is, how does the brain supposedly catch these wireless signals? To explain this, the book takes a turn into some pretty esoteric, almost occult theory. It proposes that our brain has a built-in antenna, the pineal gland. Yep, that tiny little gland, deep in the center of your brain, was believed to be the psychic receiving station, perfectly designed to pick up thought vibrations out of the ether. So after walking through this wild 1907 guide, we're left with a really fascinating question. Was all this a glimpse into a forgotten science, a genuine human ability that we've just ignored and dismissed? Or was it a masterful illusion, a really clever system of psychological suggestion and subtle physical cues, all brilliantly disguised in the scientific language of the time? The book makes its case, and it leaves us to wonder, what did they really think was possible?